June 26, 2020, another Friday, another happy hour, this time beer. Yesterday, we read verses from the Holy Bible, the Magnificat, and today, the Satanic Verses. You're probably thinking, what is this guy thinking? This is an amazing book. I think it came out when I was in college, and I didn't read the book actually until just a few years ago. It's amazing. And Salman Rushdie, you're amazing. So, near the end of the story, one of the characters is dealing with cancer. And I thought I'd just read a little bit from it. "I want you to know," he said to his son, "that I have no problem about this thing at all. A man must die of something. And it's not as though I know I'm dying young. I have no illusions. I know I'm not going anywhere after this. It's the end. That's okay. The only thing I'm afraid of is pain. Because when there is pain, a man loses his dignity. I don't want that to happen." Salahuddin was awestruck. First one falls in love with one's father all over again, and then one leans to look up to him too. "The doctors say you're a case, 1 in a million," he replied truthfully. "It looks like you've been spared the pain." Something in Changji's relaxed at that, and Salahuddin realized how afraid the old man had been, how much he needed to be told. "Bah!" Changji Chumbawala said gruffly. "Then I'm ready, and by the way, you get the lamp after all." An hour later, the diarrhea began. A thin black trickle. Nasreen's anguished phone calls to the emergency room of the breached Kandy hospital established that Panikar was unavailable. "Take him off the Energol at once," and the duty doctor ordered, "and prescribe Imodium instead." It didn't help. At 7 p.m., the risk of dehydration was growing, and Changji was too weak to sit up for his food. He had virtually no appetite, but Katsuba managed to spoon-feed him a few drops of semolina with skinned apricots. "Yum yum," he said ironically, smiling his crooked smile. The story goes on from there. But for me, as a burgeoning writer, to see that and that description, you're going to see similar descriptions coming from here. And I think it's because we all share in this human experience. And as writers, we just try to tell the truth. So let's get to our story. It's chapter 45, and it's called Another Day. So let's get to it. At dawn of the new year, Paul led Bluey outside to watch the rising sun cast reddish-orange rays onto the clouds over the barren brown vineyard. Red sky in morning, sailor take warning. After their slow shuffle, Paul pulled a lamb shank out of a pot of boiling water, cooled it, and offered Bluey a tender morsel. Paul stripped the remaining meat with his teeth and used his mouth to pass the bone to his dog, who took it and gnawed. As fog from the valley wrapped the home in melancholy, the devil delighted in the suffering he wrought, while the Lord stood back and watched, although the Almighty kept winter's weather unseasonably warm and dry, so his dog was not cold and damp. As for Bluey, he kept his smile and good nature. Sheila, who had returned from death's bed, rose to the occasion to provide continuous nursing. Helping his father recover from open-heart surgery taught Paul how to care for his dog, while caring for Bluey his final days taught Paul how to care for his father when his time came. Paul drank his own dog wine and ate his own dog food, and though he had never had a weight problem, as Bluey grew thinner, Paul's stomach expanded to that of Sheila when pregnant, because he never ate as well as when she cooked for Bluey. Sheila learned how to slow cook with a crock pot, feeding the army that picked during harvest. When she cooked a batch of Bluey's food, it lasted a week. She'd butcher a steer's hindquarters into manageable chunks, add vegetables, a cup of Paul-pressed wine, and turn on the slow cooker, filling the home with savory aromas, although she opened all windows and doors in winter to change the air. After replacing the furnace, Paul thought her habit of turning up the heat with the house open was wasteful, but he let it go. Lingering Christmas spirit allowed him to look upon his spouse with kindness, and instead of picking a fight over a few unnecessary pounds of carbon and dollars released into the atmosphere, he picked up the dog and carried him down the hill to walk on the flat section of road in front of their house. The next week, she'd open a large package of chicken breasts and add vegetables, onions, potatoes, and a splash of dog wine made by a cold nose. The fish course followed. She filleted a giant halibut, then slow-cooked it with vegetables and a cup of Bluey's blush, she finishing the bottle before the batch was fully cooked. She rinsed hard white rice, filled an electric rice cooker, and steamed it, each meal properly balanced with protein, vegetables, and carbohydrates. When Paul asked, "What's for dinner?" she answered, "Dog food." Bluey wouldn't eat, even when Paul placed a pinch of savory food into his mouth, saying, "Yum, yum, yum, yum." He took a morsel and pretended it was circling, saying, "Biz, biz, biz, biz," in a child's voice, passing it before the dog's snout, "Bluey," then circling it around his own mouth, "Papa," and then with as much drama as a father encouraging a 6-month-old to eat bzzz, in a roller coaster up and down climax, and declare, "Bluey," inserting the food into the canine's mouth that fell out. Paul called Miguel and Carrie-Anne. "It's time to dig." Miguel sent over a couple of guys, and Carrie-Anne came over for cross-training. The spot had the added benefit of a large boulder for a tombstone shaped like the well-rounded hips of a beauty smooth behind. Bluey usually joined Paul for all their activities, but on this occasion he kept Bluey inside. "It's one thing to let your dog pick his own gravesite," he told Carrie-Anne, "but another to let him watch his master dig it." When the crew arrived with shovels, Bluey, who enjoyed digging, observed from a window as they headed uphill to his favorite spot. He limped back to the child-sized mattress on the living room floor, turned around in full circle, and frump lay down, lifting an ear whenever he heard the words "pero" and "tumba," but didn't understand when Miguel asked, "Me pregunto cuándo va a bascur otro pero?" They dug and hit a gusher, puncturing a high-pressure water pipe, pushing water from the bottom of Paul's property to houses on the other side of the mountain. They found the shut-off valve and repaired the pipe, and while they waited for it to dry, picked another spot near the edge of a flat area Bluey had cleared with Bo, the first dog, so Marine One could take off with the president. In the foreground was Bluey's and Paul's favorite reed avocado, and below macadamias they had planted together. Paul went down to the house to tell Sheila about the water pipes and the need for another location. She took a look, agreed, and returned to check on Bluey. They dug the grave 3 feet deep and wide enough for a grand piano. "That would make a nice spot for a hot tub," said Carrie-Anne. They worked up a sweat, removing top layers of clothing, and one of the guys whispered to the other about the startling view. "Mira, puma!" Rarely did it cost so much to dig a dog's grave, and as soon as they finished, Bluey got better, starting the moment Carrie-Anne rubbed his belly before leaving. That afternoon, a neighbor who heard Bluey refused to eat brought over his dog and a can of Alpo. He cut open the lid of the can, and his dog, salivating, dug right in. The aromas from the can and the bowl floated to where Bluey lay, and the gourmand Hund stood up, walked to the other dog's bowl, and ate. It was a miracle. And the neighbor left a bag filled up with cans. The next day, Bluey wouldn't touch the canned food, so Sheila opened the last can of pâté de foie gras Paul carried back from Paris. He was saving for a rendezvous with Jane. "If she wants to feed Bluey fatted goose liver, go ahead." And he let it go. Anything for Bluey, who ignored it. Nor was he tempted by pizza, steak, or hot dogs, not even the kosher ones. Jenny Lee, visiting from Texas, came over to pay her respects and fed Bluey treats from her hand, and he gained another day. She planned to paint Texas landscapes after retiring, and presented Sheila with an oil painting she composed capturing the Vineyard Spirit, with a field worker in the foreground holding up a bottle of wine with vines, and Bluey in the background. The painting reminded Paul of Van Gogh style, with thick strokes of blue sky, and green vines popping off the canvas. Thank goodness the portrait resembled Rodrigo and not Miguel, or Sheila would have trashed it. Jenny Lee gave Bluey a squeaky stuffed animal bird they named Birdie Birdie. Bluey was alert and talkative during her visit, joining the conversations and basking in the limelight as the center of attention, chewing the treats she brought with gusto. Paul had been praying for the Lord to look after Bluey and was wondering if a miracle was in the works. After Carrie Ann and Jenny Lee's visits, Bluey ate a little something each day, cheered on by Birdie Birdie and Paul's biz-buzz antics. Although it was mid-January, the weather was unseasonably warm, and the next morning at dawn, Paul brought Bluey to the vineyard with Jenny Lee's painting for a photo. Although Bluey showed signs of improvement, the drool from his mouth bubbled non-stop, his stomach an acid factory. Bluey wore a baby bib at all times, and whenever Paul walked near the dog, he wiped his mouth and hair under his lips of dried spittle. Stomach cancer is nasty. Paul, escaping to daydreams of Jane and Marcy, swore he would never father another child because it was too much work. Not the fathering part, in which he would gladly engage, but the caregiving. When it became difficult for Bluey to eat from a spoon, Sheila and Paul injected soft ground food into his mouth, and afterwards wiped his mouth and changed his bib. If he stayed in one place, they put an open diaper underneath to help keep him dry. They brushed his teeth and bathed him, then administered the meds. And after taking care of their baby for a weekend, the man of the house was ready to go back to work, because there's nothing more tiring than caring for a baby. It didn't matter they lived in a house without TV, because they had no time to watch and were too tired. Once Paul avowed no more children, he immediately remembered he should never say such things, for who knew if he would have another? Anything was possible with the Lord. How about a miracle for Bluey? Theirs was a traditional household, if there ever was such a thing, where the men went to work while the women stayed home. It's strong women who put down dying dogs. Bluey stood outside on the French terrace and sadly watched Paul depart on a trip to London. When he returned to San Diego's sunshine, Bluey was waiting on the terrace in Sheila's arms, no longer able to walk. Sheila could lug Bluey because his weight had fallen from 62 pounds to 40 pounds, and his bones stuck out, worrying Paul if the geriatric fell, he would break a hip. They slung a towel under his waist and hoisted him so he could lift his leg to pee and manage a few feeble steps. Once, Bluey built enough momentum to trot 10 yards supported by the towel, and he became as picky about where he peed as he was with his food. There was a spot by the road a mile from their house visited by the bitch who once lured Bluey with her charms. He would pee there. Sheila loaded him into the car and drove to the location, and supported by the towel, with time, patience, and much sniffing around, the dog did his business. Neighbors commented as they walked by. The time is coming. The day came. He wouldn't pee, and Sheila wondered if his kidneys had failed. Neighbors who saw their efforts suggested, "You should put him down." After hearing that harsh judgment, wouldn't you know it, old Bluey lifted his leg and a gush of dark orange piss streamed out, pungent as a platoon's latrine. Paul quickly lifted his dog to keep his paws from getting soaked from the downward flow and performed a deft two-step to keep his own feet dry. That's the best dancing Paul ever did. Finding a place where he'd pee became a major part of the daily routine. For some reason, the bitch dog spot lost appeal, so Sheila drove Bluey 2 miles to the golf course where all the dogs peed, and that worked a few days. She drove him to all the spots she knew within a 5-mile radius, until finding one that worked. It was time to prune, and Bluey supervised. from a blanket on the vineyard floor in the sun, barking at the sticks, but not chasing. When Paul brought a cane for Bluey to chew, he noticed the towel soiled by a thin discharge of oozing poop. Paul picked him up, and they did their little dance, dodging a stream of putrid pee. Although Bluey lost weight, it was still a strain to carry him, and it wouldn't do good for the caregivers to throw out their backs. Paul prayed for strength for Sheila and him to carry on, and afterwards carried Bluey to the back terrace, where they connected a hose to an inside sink to wash and rinse his rear with warm water. In the afternoons, Bluey was alert and engaged, wanting to be with his companions. Paul's father called while they were outside pruning, and Paul placed the handset by the dog's ear, and the two 80-year-olds exchanged sympathies. "Growing old isn't easy, is it, Bluey?" said Jimmy, and the dog agreed and said goodbye. Although the vines were dry from drought, with every cut of a cane, each vine shed tears, bidding farewell to the king of the vineyard. One day after pruning, Paul carried Bluey to the winery, where they could be together while Paul topped the barrels. What if he passes with the bungs out of the barrels? Paul thought. Would his spirit enter the barrels, making the best wine ever? Paul was called away on business again, a trip to the polar vortex, and when he returned home, the February weather was warmer than June, and he found Sheila on the sunny porch with a nurse, administering an intravenous drip. The nurse taught Sheila and Paul how to insert the needle and squeeze the pouch to slowly pump fluids into Bluey's body. "The vet says he's dehydrated," Sheila said. "He prescribed prednisone to help manage inflammation from his arthritis and a stimulant to increase his appetite." "Anything for Bluey," said Paul. "And he said we should continue the sulfocrate to coat his stomach." Paul walked into the living room with the large windows where Bluey spent most of his time, reminding him of a hospital ward with the aromas of IV, rubbing alcohol, and old age fermentations. Each day could be his last. So Sheila cooked a monstrous ball of Bluey's favorite foods, lamb chops, filet mignon, fish sticks, in the hopes he would eat something. At best, the dog nibbled, and since the food was too good to waste, Paul continued gaining weight, while Sheila became thinner from her worries. Paul was thinking it was time to have the talk. Sheila vowed, back in November, to take care of Bluey until the end, and as his condition worsened, she started saying, "You can decide," acknowledging a life of continuous drooling, daily regurgitation, inability to walk, incontinence, and having all kinds of medicine forced down your throat isn't pleasant. Paul wasn't going to make the final decision, because if he said, "Let's put him to rest," she'd hound him to his last days with, "You killed Bluey." "Let's wait and see," he suggested. "He's still alert and not in pain. He enjoys being with us." The next morning, at 5 a.m., Paul woke with a clear mind, determined to call Dr. Dvorkian, and found Bluey stretching on the mattress, clawing with his paws, snorting, and saying, "I want to play." He was frisky, and Paul thought it must be the IV and steroids. He lifted Bluey outside through the back door, where he had a good long pee by his old regular spot. Later that week, the patient started waking up at midnight, talkative, but agitated. They took him outside, but he wouldn't pee. What's he saying, if not pee? The fresh air calmed him, just like carrying Kate outside as an infant calmed her when she cried. Paul suspected the appetite stimulant was stimulating Bluey a bit too much, so they reduced the dosage, which calmed him, but he lost his appetite. On a Wednesday, late in February, on the third day of Bluey's latest hunger strike, Paul and Sheila lifted him into the car to visit the vet. "Is he in pain?" they asked. "I see no outward signs," said the doctor, as Bluey smiled under the admiring eyes and calming touches of nurses. The doctor suggested they purchase a dog cart on wheels to move him down the hill more easily to his favorite spot. He also offered additional IV bags and needles. "How many do you need?" "How about a month's supply?" was Paul's diplomatic answer. In a few days would suffice. The next morning, Paul was late for work and left Sheila holding the IV bag to replenish Bluey's fluids. When he was halfway to the office, his phone rang. He saw it was Sheila, so he answered. She was crying and moaning. What's the matter?" he repeated. He couldn't understand her and turned the car around, believing Bluey had died. He found Sheila sobbing and Bluey alert in the sun on the terrace. "What's wrong?" "I stuck myself with this needle. I'm going to get AIDS." Paul called the vet's office and spoke with the nurse. When he told her Sheila's tetanus shots were up to date, she assured him she'd be fine. 2 days later, and it was Paul's turn to give Bluey an IV, Sheila warned him, "Be careful with the needle." "Don't worry," and he administered the IV so skillfully, he scripted a YouTube video to document his technique. After extracting the needle, he accidentally stabbed himself. "I told you to be careful," Sheila said. "Even monkeys fall from trees." On Saturday morning, they made another monstrous ball of his favorite things with a new treat, bacon. When a dog doesn't eat bacon, the time is coming. Bluey filled Bluey's mouth with yogurt and soup, and some of it made it to his stomach. With pruning finished, and winter unseasonably warm, bud break started before they had time to do the dormant spraying, which is important to knock back mildew before tender new shoots emerge. The spraying needed to be done quickly, while most of the vines were still bare of foliage. With Sheila singing a never-ending song against Miguel, Paul contacted a professional vineyard manager to do the spraying. But when the professional drove his ATV on their hills, he backed after, promising, "No problem, I can spray your vines." He couldn't. There was only one thing to do on short notice: call Miguel. He arrived driving Joe's Gator, a mighty Ben-Hur on his chariot, unable to walk steadily because of his second sore knee, but well enough to collect money and spray a vineyard. Sheila's disdain for Miguel was greater than that for her husband. If there were a Dr. Seuss tale about Miguel, Sheila's character would say, "I hate that rascal, I do indeed. I hate Miguel, he does no good deed." "Hola, Miguel, how's your esposa?" Paul asked about his wife. "Not too good. How's your son?" He asked about Bluey. "Not too good. You should go down to the house and see him before you leave." So after the spraying was finished, he waddled down the hill to the house, peeling an orange he took from the tree, eyeing those left. "How are you, Senor Dog?" he asked Bluey. "Boff," said a perro, and the two old dogs started yakking about their pains. Bluey looked up at Miguel with mournful eyes. Miguel said to Paul, "It's time to put him down. Maybe it's time to cut off your bad leg. Maybe it's time to spray Roundup on your vines instead of stylet oil. I heard you already did that to Joe by accident." "Puta madre!" Paul walked over to Bluey and stroked his head. "We're all getting older," he sighed. "Hey, Vineyardista!" Miguel called to Sheila. "How's your blood pressure?" "Out of control." "Me too. I had to go to the fucking hospital." "Really? What happened?" "Blood pressure too high." "How high?" "Over 200. "Gosh, the same as mine when it spiked," said Sheila. "How did you lower it?" It was the first civil conversation they'd had in years. "They gave me some pills. It worked." "What's the name of the medicine?" "Valsartan," he said. "You should try it. You're too tense." "Excuse me, I need to sit down." She stepped from the terrace into the house. Paul followed her inside and asked, "Are you all right?" "I need to rest," she replied. "Don't let Miguel steal all the oranges." Paul went to his desk and pulled cash from a drawer and went outside and found Miguel rubbing Bluey behind the ears. In all the years he saw these two interact, Miguel taunted and teased the dog, except for this day. He handed Miguel the money and asked, "Do you have enough oranges?" "Yeah, thanks." "Call me when you need some help. I can send some guys over." "Who's the new guy you brought today?" "He just started working for me." "I haven't seen Rodrigo recently. How is he?" "A fucking ICE deported him." "Really?" "He was driving home one day and saw a checkpoint. To avoid it, he pulled his car over and walked away. The cops noticed him and he started running. He jumped over a wall and broke his leg when he landed." "Oh, that's too bad. A nice guy and a good worker. He's in Mexico. I'm planning to bring him back soon." "How?" "I know some guys," he said. "Your property is a fucking mess. You should look at the Max and Carrie Ann's and Joe's. It's nice over there. Let me send some guys here and we'll keep your property looking good." "I'll call you later," said Paul, meaning maybe never. Miguel stepped into the gator and waved to Bluey. "Adios, senior dog." And as he drove past, Miguel pinched an orange. Paul pinched an orange from the pile Miguel had plundered from his trees and marched up the hill, leaving behind a trail of peels. "Let Miguel have all the fucking oranges he wants," Paul muttered, tossing a peel into the vineyard in an act of defiance, for he knew Sheila hated it when he littered her vineyard with organic matter. He picked up the tools and put them in the shed, then walked down the hill to update Bluey's faithful followers on Twitter. Laying on of hands, stroking his head, whispering a prayer, grateful for the joy and blessings he gave us, praying for relief from pain, praying that we, as humans, may be as generous as his dog-friendly nature, that guardian angels be with him and take him home to St. Francis. And in the fullness of time, may we all be reunited in your heavenly kingdom. Amen. Sunday morning. No walks in the vineyard, with the vines freshly sprayed, only to the porch for fresh air and to bask in the sun. It takes time for a sick dog and people to die. Paul returned to Twitter. How long does it take a dog who has stopped eating to die? A chorus of followers responded, strengthening Paul, who realized he wasn't alone. At Aussie and me. It took my little red 2 weeks. We love you, Bluey. Peace be with you. At Whiskey the Aussie. Aussies never die. They just get to the Rainbow Bridge ahead of you. At Aussie Breeder. Bless Bluey. We put Tess down 2 days after she stopped eating. Couldn't stand to see her in pain. With his fingers, Paul inserted a little puree of ground vegetables and meat between Bluey's jaws, and for dessert a little yogurt. At 11:53 a.m., Paul tweeted, "Whoops, forgot to put diapers on geriatric dog. Well, at least he had one poop left in him. Time to clean it up. Growing old, not for sissies." Paul lifted his companion and carried him to the back terrace, supporting him with one arm as Bluey stood on all fours, and with his other arm he hosed Bluey's rear with warm water, lathering his fur with soap, the dark dirt of poop growing lighter, thinner, until washed away, the dog clean for a queen. Who will do this for me when it's my turn? Paul wondered. Kate? She'll say, "Dad, don't worry. I'll take care of you and Mom when you're old." Probably not. Alex? He's a good son. That evening, as Paul walked out the door for a black tie wine tasting dinner at the Escondido Center for the Arts, sponsored by the Rotary Club, the neighbor's cat crept in front of the house, careful not to cross paths with the canine. "Karov, kitty, come here," Paul called. "It's safe for you to come over. Bluey won't chase you today." At the event, Paul explained to guests stopping by to taste. "This is locally grown and locally made," diplomatically not adding when he met the mayor, "with assistance from people you kicked out of town." He pointed to the label. "This is our dog Bluey, a blue merle Australian shepherd, founder of the Vineyard and chief wine taster. Paul thought, maybe branding your winery or any business with your pet isn't a good idea. Years later, at wine tastings, he continued saying when pointing to the back label, "This is Bluey, our dog," using the present tense. Paul returned home before 10 p.m. and hugged Bluey, resting in the living room on his makeshift bed. Paul soaked a washcloth under a hot faucet, wrung it, then clean caked in wet spittle from Bluey's mouth. He crawled into a futon next to Bluey, and for a few minutes after closing his eyes, Bluey called, "Pee-pee." Paul rose from the warm futon, picked Bluey out of his bed, carried him outside into the cool winter darkness, down the steep driveway to an old faithful favorite spot, and the dog released heavy, viscous urine of dying dehydration while Paul deftly dodged the stream. "Good boy," he praised, wondering if he just threw out his back. "This can't go on. In the morning, I'm calling Dr. Dvorkin." Paul carried the bag of breathing bones up the hill to the house, wiped the drool from the corner of his mouth, brushed the dog's teeth, and placed a fresh towel under his head to absorb the drool to come. Paul pulled the velvet blue blanket over Bluey and fell asleep with his hand on Bluey's back. Just after midnight, Bluey called Paul and Sheila with a soft moan of primordial dog speech. "What's wrong?" asked Sheila, emerging from the bedroom. "I don't know. I took him to pee just a couple of hours ago," replied Paul, who sat up next to the dog, who retched into a towel Paul held under his mouth. He lifted Bluey's head, removed the soiled towel, replaced it with a clean one, and wiped his mouth with a warm, fresh washcloth Sheila brought. He threw up a second time, spoiling the fresh towel. "I'm running out of towels," said Paul, who felt Bluey become utterly still for a long second. "How is he?" "I think his heart stopped," said Paul. "It's beating again. Tonight could be his last. Would you bring me another towel?" "This is the last one," said Sheila, handing him a fresh soft towel he put under Bluey's head. Sheila opened the windows and the door to the terrace. "Why are you opening the windows?" "If he dies, it'll be easier for his spirit to go outside and up to heaven." As Paul held Bluey in his arms, he retched a third time, and for the second time that night, Paul felt absolute silence as the dog's heart and breathing stopped. A chibi squirt of pee escaped, and Bluey was still. Paul placed his ear against Bluey's chest and heard the silent calm of death. "How is he?" "He's much better," said Paul. "It's finished. Please go back to bed. I'll stay here with him." Sheila, not comprehending he was gone, went back to her bed, while Paul lay down next to Bluey, placed his arm over his furry body, and pulled the blue velvet blanket, the cape of the king, up to their necks, and kept vigil until exhaustion lulled him to sleep. Blowing winds startled Sheila from sleep, and she looked above her bed and saw Bluey with wings. "Goodbye, Bluey," she called, and the wind strengthened, carrying his spirit up to heaven, where a new star brightened the night sky. Winds crescendoed into a howl that toppled trees and fanned waves that crashed upon Southern California beaches, breaching the coastal highway. Tears from heaven's angels drenched San Diego with pounding rains, with periods of calm after each wave of emotion passed. Then, overcome with grief again, tears swelled and more rain fell. Puddles grew into ponds, and water filled the caked bottom of Escondido's Lake Hodges Reservoir that had given birth to a forest when the water disappeared, and soon treetops were under water. The reservoir overflowed for the first time in 20 years, washing hibernating rattlesnakes from their dens all the way to the sea, although some rode the waves and landed on Del Mar's beach. The snowpack in the Sierra Pacific Mountains rose to such heights, airplanes readjusted their routes, and California's governor declared an end to the drought. Bluey's spirit ascended, where he was greeted by his Creator and the council of heaven, who wept, lamenting all the suffering the Lord had allowed. And when this final storm of tears fell from the sky, it cracked the back of California's dams. The Lord welcomed his good shepherd into his arms, as all the saints, prophets, and council bore witness. Behold, the Lamb appeared draped in bishop's vestments, and Bluey, amazed by all he saw, barked in excitement, "Look, the Lamb! Whoa, whoa, whoa!" His whole life geared for this one ephemeral, eternal moment, and after barking in sheepherder mode, heard on earth as powerful thunder, Bluey sat at the right hand of the Father to keep watch over the Lamb. Heaven's grieving paused. Rain on earth gave way to morning sun, or morning's dawn, and as the sun peeked over the hills of Palomar Mountain, a double-barrel rainbow arched over San Diego's backcountry, and if you followed it to the end, you would have found a modest, single-story home on a mountainside surrounded by a vineyard. And each year, on the anniversary of Bluey's death, the rain that fell on San Diego was a sign of the Lord's love for his people and his dog.